Hello everyone, so in this lecture I am going to give you an example of sniffing. So we are going to discuss about using like EtherCap to perform address resolution protocol poisoning. So EtherCap is a tool available in Kali Linux which is very built-in, and also it is available on most of the Linux distributors. So but it's better to use the Kali Linux for penetration testing, and I always prefer you to use the Kali Linux. And but EtherCap, this allows you to scan the entire environment for host, and from there on you can actually look out for the target system, and that can be launched and access. So ARP poisoning, which is means it poisons the MAC address and IP addresses, and to the network poisoning, the EtherCap or ARP cache, and you will be able to perform the management man in the middle attack. So once you in the man in the middle, you can look out for using names, password, and other sessions like IDs, cookies, information that you will be able to copy and replicate so many of this data into the hacker machine, and then you can replicate those sessions and able to perform a lot of post exploitation attacks. So without further ado, let's get started. So here I have got a virtual machine on my which is Kali Linux, and also I am using another. This is the victim machine which is Ubuntu. So we are gonna use this Ubuntu as a victim machine. So and you have to know this IP address. So these have a different IP address than this. So make sure you know your victim's IP address. Otherwise, this won't work. So moving forward, we got a server which is running. Or you can check. So let's go to our terminal. And make sure you set this as 1, because otherwise you will face some difficulties. You can also ignore this part, but I would prefer you to do this because sometimes you may face some difficulty getting the username and password. So it's better to use this IP forward as 1 so that you can work without any error. So let's just open EtherCap. So from, as you can see, it will sniff at the startup. Make sure you use their own interface, because as you can see my own interface is ETH0. As you can see, ETH0. So make sure you use your own one. So then just press this. So this will, as you can see, this will start the united sniffing. So what you have to do now is you have to search for all of your IP address from your gateway, main gateway. So what you need to do, you can do by using search, or you can just simply click this button. As you can see, it will scan all of those hosts. As you can see, it will scan all of those, and you can just click here, or you can just click as host and host list. So pretty much the same. As you can see, these are all the hosts that are connected with this network. So this is our main default gateway. So and again, moving forward, the first thing we want to do is scan for host. The great thing about EtherCap is it reschedule the entire network or the network that all the hosts are connected. So if you go to this host list, you can see all of those hosts within your subnetwork. So here, as mentioned earlier, we got a couple of IP address that we are targeting. So one is this, we will use this as target 1, and maybe 104 is my Ubuntu. Let's just test. How can you check? Just simple ifconfig, it will give you if sorry, my bad. So I think 104, okay, this is 104, and let's just minimize. So we're gonna select our victim machine as target 2. As you can see, which is on target. So what you have to do now is target and current target. As you can see, these are two of my current target. So this is the target 2, and we're going to, so you need to add these two as your target 1 and target 2. So once you've done that, you can go to the target and look up for the target in here, or you can just simply click here for this shortcut. So from here you can see the target options, and of course you can begin your ARP spoofing. However, before we go there, I am going to show you. Okay, now let's just go to how we can sniff man in the middle attack. So let's just click this in here, man in the middle attack, click ARP spoofing, and you must, in default this will be like this, but you have to sniff remote connection, you have to click this must. This is a must option, so make sure you click this and just press OK, and it will sniff all of those in our targeted victim machine, which is my Ubuntu machine. So as we click the ARP poisoning, we will start the sniffing process. Now what you can do is you can just sniff using or getting the packet using the TCP dump or Wireshark, which is easy, but I prefer TCP dump because I always love the command line interface. So what you can do is, so this is your wired network, so make sure you check your one. This is the port, we're gonna define our port because we're gonna, so as you can see, this is our victim machine. So we're gonna check all of this and just press enter. So it will listening all of those on in here. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna just now use our victim machine. So let's put it in this side and put it in here. Okay, put it in here. So let's go to our Firefox, and as you can see, it will listening all of those packets. You can, as I previously said, you can use this differently with Wireshark, or you can use this like mine, which is TCP dump. So what now is to do is we're gonna sniff username and password from our victim machine to our target machine. So let's just visit our any vulnerable web page. So let's just visit in here. So let's just go to this web page, and as you can see, there is nothing in here. We're gonna just sign up. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna just put a random character for testing purpose. So let's just type test and type test as username and password. As you can see, all of those are in here. Username is test, password is test. So as you can see, you can sniff around all of these without even trying hard. It's very easy. So once you've done that, you can get many information or username, credential, password, or any other things from victim machine. And also, as you can see, packets are all also running in here. So once you do that, you will be able to use the washer TCP dump to traffic that's coming in and out before between a server and a client PC, that you can see also the username and password. Session ID. So from that you can launch or log or post the exploitation or a post attack, and that you have now get the attention of your credential. Then also you have the session ID, and now you have also the cookies value that you can actually utilize to perform further attack into this victim machine environment. So that's how you do sniffing using EtherCap. As you see, it's pretty easy and you can get almost anything in here. And I hope you have learned something available or in today's lecture.
Hello there. In this course I will show you guys introduction and basic of session hijacking. First I will show scanning definition and scanning basics, like scanning all you need to know. After that I will show types and techniques of scanning. After that I will show you guys tools used for scanning, and after completing this I will show how to do scanning out of your own network, and completing that I will show you guys introduction to network scanning. Inside network scanning I will show you guys Nmap demonstration, Angry IP and Nmap demonstration, Netcat demonstration, ASPing 3 for scanning demonstration, firewalking demonstration, OS fingerprinting and Nmap demonstration, and the three-way handshake understanding and demonstration, and advanced technique of scanning demonstration. After completing that, after completing network scanning, I will show you guys vulnerability scanning, and inside vulnerability scanning I will show you guys vulnerability scanning basic and demonstration, Nissa's demonstration, and Skifish and Vega demonstration. And after completing this I will show you guys Nmap scripting engine running NSC script demonstration, and Metasploit scanner modules demonstration. Number 5 and last, I will show inside vulnerability scanning and what is Metasploit scanner modules demonstration. After completing vulnerability scanning, I will show you guys scan out of your own network 2-part, and after that I will show some real world example of scanning demonstration. Hello there. So let's talk about TCP IP. So what is TCP IP? A server accepts a connection, must be looking for new connections. A client requests a connection, must know where the server is. Basically, it is TCP connection. So here is a diagram in TCP. So there is four layer in TCP: application layer, transport layer, network layer, local access layer. Application layer, a mail request is made. The application designates designates the correct port 25 to indicate the service being requested. Then transport layer, the data is segmented and broken down into packets. A TCP header is attached and it's passed to the network layer. The network layer, an IP header with this recipient IP address is attached and the data is sent to the correct network via router. And local access layer, the data arrives is converted to a transmittable format and sent within the network to the device via its MAC address. So here is TCP header. So starting bit is 0 and ending 31. Mid-range bit 15 bit and 16 bit, total 32 bits. And left hand side source port take 60 bit and destination port take 60 bit. Sequence number, acknowledgement number, all of them are 60 bit. Header length 4, reserved 6, code bytes 6, and window text 16 and another urgent 16. Checksum 16. So it's a TCP header. Hello there. So what is three-way handshake? Three-way handshake. Three-way handshake or a TCP three-way handshake is a process which is used in a TCP IP network to make a connection. So here is the TCP client ports, TCP server ports. It's actually three-way handshake. SYN, ACK and ACK. It is a three-step process that requires both the client and server to exchange. So, UDP. What is UDP? User Datagram Protocol. UDP is a communications protocol that is primarily used to establish low latency and loss tolerating connections between applications on the internet. So here is TCP versus UDP communication. Here sender get request from receiver in UDP and then replay response. three types. UDP speeds up transmissions by enabling the transfer of data before an agreement is provided by the receiving party. In computer networking, the user datagram protocol is one of the core members of the Internet Protocol. So here is some uh, specifications and difference between TCP and UDP. TCP is secure, UDP not secure. TCP connection oriented, UDP connectionless. TCP slow, UDP fast. TCP guaranteed transmission, no guarantee UDP. TCP used by critical applications, UDP used by real-time applications. TCP packet recorder, UDP no recorder. Flow control, no flow control. Error checking, UDP no error checking. TCP takes 20 bytes header, UDP takes 8 bytes header. Acknowledgement mechanism, or UDP no acknowledgement. TCP three-way handshake, UDP no handshake. TCP DNS, HTTP, HTTPS, FTP, SMTP, Talent, SNMP. UDP DNS, DHCP, TFTP, SNMP, RIP, VOID. That's the core difference between TCP and UDP. So the Wireshark. So I installed Wireshark for TCP connections. So just check this tick mark. Here you search PLURASIGST.com. The Wireshark have some command line. Here you find IP addresses. So let's check this. You guys just install Wireshark. Simple, Google it and download it, then install it, Wireshark. Wireshark is a network packet analyzer. Basically, a network packet analyzer will try to capture computer packets. So here you look some network packets. So live capture from different network media. Now I show you Wireshark can capture traffic from many different network media types, and despite its name, including wireless LAN as well, which media types are supported depends on many things like the operating system you are using. An overview of the supported media types. There are protocol decoders. It's actually open source software. Open source project is released under GNU General Public License GPL. So TCP header transmission control protocol header. It takes 60 bytes. Source port number takes 2 bytes. Destination port number 2 bytes. Sequence number 4 bytes. Acknowledgement number 4 bytes. Under data offset, reserved, control flags, window size, checksum 2 bytes, and urgent pointer 2 bytes.
To understand UDP level hijacking, let's just do a quick UDP 101. So UDP is a connectionless transition model, and it is a bare minimum protocol mechanism. So for example, there is a handshaking and there is no resiliency against unreliability and underlying network, and as well as packets and that are sent and just forgotten about. As I said earlier, this works great for communication mechanism where speed is much more important than reliability. So again, something like VoIP, but because there is no acknowledgement of the receipt and the packages, and never know what it's actually reach the destination, and in some ways that actually makes session hijacking. So session hijacking is a bit easier because we don't have host and clients. Looking forward responses from the other one acknowledging receipt. What all this means is in terms of session hijacking is that the attack it doesn't need to worry about the synchronizing the connection. Like as an example, in TCP hijacking, they can just send the packets and block packets without having to worry about anything like acknowledgements. So let's take this as an example. I say the victim sends a UDP request to the server. So we're going to bring out the tackler in. So after bringing out the attacker in and because the server has a chance to respond with his own UDP packets, the attacker is going to forge your response to the victim. So I guess this is a bit of a risk condition. So long as the attacker can get in first, they will be one to successfully send the request and the responses, but the attack it could go even further if they can successfully mount a man and in the minute of connection, because they could look for the responses from the server and simply block it. So the server isn't expecting an acknowledgement from the response. This that the TCP isn't anymore, so it really has no way to knowing that its packets of actually arrived in the victim and arriving at a victim at a same time the response. So there are a couple of different levels and they are for the attacker to clearly forging. So after forging its own response and beating the server, it is a very I would say time critical exercise. Whether the blocking the response does require a man in the middle as well. So there is a couple of different ways to hijacking. So UDPs as well as and let's move on to take a bit something different in the browser attack, and let's discuss about the UDP session hijacking. So since UDP does not use packet sequencing and synchronizing, it's easier than TPA to hijack the UDP session. I would say this hijacker has simply to force the server to reply a client on the UDP, and the UDP request before the server can respond. So its sniffing is used then it will be easier to control, and it will be easier to control the traffic generating from the side of the server, thus the restricting server replied client in the first place and force server to reply client BDB before it responds, and basically it's easier to control the traffic in the first place. So in this one we'll be start looking at the session hijacking and both of the network and the client level. So we are going to be talking about the TCP, UDP and also man in the browser attack. And so while this while is still session hijacking is a very different threat to what we have been seen in terms of session hijacking in a web application. So let's go and take a look about what I am going to cover in this one. So we are going to predominantly network level focus throughout the remainder of this, and we'll get one thing really close upfront, and we'll talk about the network level session hijacking, and this is the risk we have to largely pass now. So certainly when you look at where the proportion of hijacking attacks are, but in modern days of application and network, it's at the web layer of the network and the network layer form a very small part of session hijacking takes today. So this is a little bit of, as I said here, a remnant of a bygone era. Now the reason I am including it is because if you are working toward your SH network, and level session hijacking is one of the things they talk about. But as you will see, we will progress through this one, and most of these examples are presence of a TCP level hijack in particular, and some are old, but it may be an interesting history lesson, so we are going to cover it here. We are just not going to go as in depth, but we are going to just for the web application live. Now when we talk about the network level session and the session hijacking, we are talking about the layer 4 of the OSI model, and that's the network layer so far. So we have been only looking at layer 7, which is actually up at the app layer. So we are going to get down to the lower in the stack, and as we progress you will see the different level of details to what we have seen before. So we have actually going to be looking at the pocket level on the network layer. Now firstly I mentioned that we are going to be looking at both TCP and UDP, and if you are not already aware of the difference between these two protocols, don't worry, I am going to make it clear that we can go into this, and I will explain how the risk of session hijacking differs between the two, because they are pretty much fundamentally different communication protocols. And finally we are going to take a look at the risk of the client. So we are actually going to talk about a man in the browser attack, whether client software is compromised. So not in the application here, not the network here, but the browser running on the victim machine. So that's a quite different attack vector, when the attacker can actually control what's inside on the operating system or within the browser. So that's what we are going to look at. Let's move on and start to understand the TCP protocol and understand the TCP protocol a little bit better before we start looking at session hijacking across it. So here is the TCP level session hijacking attack. So we are going to look at its IP spoofing. Now when we talk about the IP spoofing is the attack that it doesn't need to guess the sequence number or get to the middle of the communication, because there's not necessarily a connection or already open with the target machine. IP spoofing for the purpose of network level session, and which is the session hijacking, and it takes advantage of source and route package. So this is where the sender of a packet can partially or completely specify the route, and the packet takes the network. So let's take a look how this works. So firstly, let's bring our attacker in. Now attacker is going to determine the IP address of a trusted host. Once they've got it, they can construct what's referred to as a source route packet. So that's a packet where the sender actually determines the route it is going to take. So obviously this is all dependent on the environment, and which allowing the source routed as opposed to delegating the routing to actual owner, and because of the actual router but doing that, the attacker is able to fool the server into believing that it's communicating with the victim. So effectively they're supposed to do that address, and they have just sent the packet to the target machine. Now once they do that, they can desynchronize the connection with the victim and resume it themselves. So there's IP spoofing. There are a number of things that have to be very specific in place, that is specific network environment for it to happen, but certainly that is the one mechanism of TCP level session, and which is the session hijacking, and that's the end of the TCP. So let's look at to protect against the IP spoofing. So use the strong verification and authentication method for all remote access, and do not authenticate devices and uses solely based on IP address. Makes an SEL of IP addresses, and use both ingress and egress packet filtering, and use antivirus and other security software that watches the suspicious network activity, and the use IP level encryption protocol to protect traffic going to and from the enterprise server. This approach keeps attacker from reading potential IP addresses to impersonate, and keep network software updated, and practice good patch management, and performing ongoing network monitoring can help to protect against this IP spoofing. Blind hijacking describes as a type of session hijacking in which the attacker cannot capture the return traffic from the host connection. This means that the attacker blindly injecting malicious or manipulative packets without seeing any confirmation of the desired effect through the packet capture. The attacker must attempt to predict a sequence number of TCP packets traversing for network between the victim and whatever is on the other end for the established connection. The reason for this prediction goes back to the TCP three-way handshake, which has the function of synchronizing sequence number between two parties in a process of establishing a connection. So we kind of look at a number of different attack vectors for TCP hijacking, and I want to start with blind hijacking now. What is in the take to trying here is to predict the sequence number and the target host sends, so that they can create what appears to be a legitimate connection from the host. It's blind because they cannot discover the existing sequence numbers themselves. They have to predict them instead. Now this is all dependent on the attacker's ability to actually predict the second numbers, and it's blind and they cannot sniff the existing traffic, so they have to derive it by any other means. The attacker may specifically look at the RISC host running version of the operating system known as produce predictable sequence number. So let's walk through the process. Here is a two host, and there is a communication between the backwards and the forwards with sequences and acknowledgement numbers. Now let's talk about the attacker in, and here the attacker who is looking for those hosts at risk of predictable sequence numbers. Now once identified, the attackers wants to desynchronize the connection between machine. Basically what that means is that the attacker is aiming to change the sequence or acknowledge the number of the server. Now they can do this in a few different ways. Like for example, they could send null data to the server, which means the CNAC number will increment on that end but not on the client side. And another and final approach would be the send a reset flag. In fact, you may have noticed in the early TCP header diagram that there is an RST attribute. Now if the attacker can send that to the server, they could destroy the sessions from that end. Now once the attacker has finally and successfully desynchronized the connection, they can then insert themselves back to the communication by taking advantage of that predictable and sequence number, and then again communicate that directly. The host and the service synchronize with the attacker so that they can resume the communication themselves. So blind hacking is one potential text vector, but again it's useful when the attacker cannot actually sniff the connection, but they can exploit the predictability of sequence numbers. So let's move on and have a look at the approach. And also one point, the attacker can use when they can actually sniff the connection, like, and also attacker can inject the malicious data or comment into the intercepted communication in the TCP session, even if the source route is disabled. And also the attacker can send the data or command but has no access to the responses that he get. So remember that a packet within the window would be accepted in this blind TCP hijacking. So sending a valid packet with a RST flag would drop the connection. So this would cause the connection to drop straight away. So sending a valid packet on the other hand, sending a valid packet with a SON flag would reset the connection. This means that this would drop the connection after the host responded to the packet, not like the previous one where the connection dropped the straight away. Both of the above point that I mentioned can be very nasty as a DOS attacker. And for DOS attacks, sending a packet with a valid payload would get the host to execute a command. For example, inserting a command into a FTP connection. So all of this blind TCP hijacking, because they are non-interactive exploits, but they are very effective and easy, and on the other side they are very difficult to trace. So finally the attacker, I can say that the attacker can inject the malicious data or comments into the intercepted communication in the TCP session, even if the source routing is disabled. So the attacker can send the data and comments but has no access to see the responses. So we just looked at blind hijacking, where the attacker going to exploit the predictability of a sequence number to take on a connection that already exists between a victim and a host. So let's now move on and talk about a man in the middle session sniffing attack. And of course, when we talk about a man in the middle, we are going to talk about an attacker getting into a midst of the communication between the victim and the target machine. So let's take this for an example. We have got our victim in our machine and they are communicating backward and forward with all the usual sequences and acknowledgement numbers. The attacker then comes into the picture and reroute the packets. Now, how do they do this? Well, one option would be the forge ICMP packages and the internet control message protocol, which would give them the ability to redirect the traffic between the client and the host, such that a pass through the attacker machine question like app spoofing, so app is exploding, and the address resolution protocol such as app tables and modified via the app reply, and the victim traffic is sent by the host. Now those would both be attacks where they simply all exist on the same network, and of course there are also physical interception and on the connection on the wire as well. Either way, the attacker gets in here and modifies the existing connection to reroute through them. They are now effectively a man in the middle and they can sniff the traffic, which include the contents of those TCP packets. So in many ways, not the different to session hijacking right up to the application level. So that's the man in the middle session sniffing. Let's look more on more the TCP level session hijacking attack, and that's the IP spoofing. So types of man in the middle session attacks. Specific types of man in the middle session attacks include the rough access point attacks, ARP spoofing, and DNS spoofing. So rough access point is the wireless device generally attempts to connect to the wireless access point with the strongest signal, which is automatically. During a rough access point, an attacker creates an access point in an attempt to loot the nearby devices into connecting it. These types of man in the middle session attack is effective because it only requires a physical proximity to the target. ARP spoofing. ARP spoofing is the address resolution protocol, which allow the discovery of the media access control like as short MAC with each IP address in a local network like as a LAN. When one host needs to communicate with another host with a given IP address, it must first reference the ARP cache to resolve the IP address to a MAC address. An attacker performing a ARP spoofing responds to this request with its own MAC address. So by intercepting traffic to legitimate user or services, an attacker can gain access to information like session token that allow them to hijack the session. And the final one is DNS spoofing. DNS spoofing, aka DNS cache poisoning, is conceptually similar to like MDNS spoofing, although it's typically more challenging to execute. The attacker must prove the target host and with false information with the intention of poisoning the host's DNS cache. The poison cache will cause the target to access the attacker host rather than the legitimate host. Then the victim of a DNS spoofing attack may then provide sensitive information under the assumption that it's communicating with the trusted host. and prevent man in the middle attack. So having a strong encryption mechanism on wireless access point prevents unwanted user from joining your network just by being nearby. A weak encryption mechanism can allow an attacker to brute force his way into a network and begin the man in the middle attack. And the stronger the encryption implementation is, it is the safer. It's essential to make sure that your default router login is changed, not just your Wi-Fi password but your router login credential. If an attacker finds your router login credential, they can change your DNS server to their malicious server, or even worse, infect your router with malicious software. And VPN can be used to create a secure environment for sensitive information within a local area network. The key is to use the key-based encryption to create a subnet for secure communication. This way, even if an attacker happens to get on a network that is shared, he will not be able to decipher the traffic in the VPN. And the final one is force HTTPS. So HTTPS can be used to securely communicate over HTTP using the public private key exchange. This prevents an attacker from having any use of the data he may be sniffing, and website should only use HTTPS and not provide HTTP alternatives. User can install browser plugins to enforce using HTTPS on request. So let's summarize this. And the first thing, which I have made pretty clear quite a few times, that in terms of TCP level hijacking, this risk has been significantly mitigated. All of this talk around predictable sequence number is a risk that goes back to not just the 90s but all the way back to the 80s in the operating systems that did have a predictable numbers and have since been significantly mitigated. And the style of attack is now a very small part of the overall session. So hijacking risk in network and application. Now having said that, if we can get an attacker in the middle of encryption traffic, there is still going to be a risk. So we looked at a man in the middle session sniffing before, and clearly if someone can interrupt all these packets and getting themselves into the middle of a network, then yes, this is still going to be a risk. This is why having encryption, and this is why things like HTTPS is important. We are going to look at more in the next module. And finally, we looked at a man in the browser attack. For attacking and compromising a host machine is still a very serious risk. So if an attack can exploit vulnerabilities in safe plugins and executed drive-by downloads such as host or the browser becomes compromised, then they can do some serious damage. It's a very difficult class of risk though. You cannot protect against that inner web application, which is very difficult to protect against, and that the TCP it lives alone, which is the level. But a man in the browser attack is something that still comes up a lot when the session hijacking is talked about. So it was important that we covered it here. So that's the networking client and the networking client level session and the session level hijacking. So let's now move on and have a look at actually mitigating the risk of session hijacking, because as usual, as it is to be the identify all the vulnerabilities that we have looked across. So finally I can say this is a really important thing, which is being able to protect against those risks. So I think I covered all the basic and the all the topics in this man in the middle session attack. So thank you. And the last attack that I want to look at is that a man in the browser attack. So let's assume we have got a victim and we have got our host. Now we will bring in the attacker, and the key thing is here that about a man in the browser attack is that the attacker is going to infect the victim browser with the Trojan. Now I don't want to trivialize this, but this is not necessarily a simple thing, and we are going to assumption that the victim has some sort of vulnerability in their browser or in their operating system. So because of that allows the attacker to do this, and you will be often see this is just one line item attacker, and infect the victim browser with a Trojan as though it's a simple thing, but there is a huge amount of effort and defenses that goes into protecting browsers and operating system from the style of attack. So having said that, it does happen. So for example, we see exploit against plugin like Flash or Java, which can lead a drive by a text. The victim just visit the site and it exploit, and a vulnerable version of plugin execute the code on their machine. So when we talking about the browser, we have seen browser plugins or extension which have been malicious in the past, and the key thing here is about a man in the browser attack is we are saying that there is a malicious software that's running in the browser. So now what that mean is that when the browser and when the victim browse the target site, the Trojan can execute in exact data from a DOM. So what would be used to within the DOM of a browser will clearly anything this is actually entered into a browser credential. For example, anything that persists in the browser cookies. So we have been looking for a session cookies extensively we have been sorry about that we have been looked into a session cooker extensively already previously in the lectures. So naturally there are also URLs that malicious software executing in the context of the browser, and that could access to this. So the man in the browser attack which has some points of effects like browser helps the object which dramatically loaded libraries and which loaded the Internet Explorer upon startup, and extension the equivalent of browser helps object for Firefox browser API hooking. So this is the technique used by man in the browser to perform its man in the middle between the executable application like exe and its library like .dll and the JavaScript by using a malicious IXOM. So here is some example. So after website column and fields or alter them and alter financial transaction information including account details and pursue details, suspend or cease all ongoing transaction in real time, alter a website's appearance, alter the server's response such as thank you pages, seize data entered into fields on a website, alter the transaction history if the user revisits the website again. So how to prevent the man in the browser attack? So I am afraid there isn't much we can do to protect against man in the browser attack, but that doesn't mean you cannot do anything. It's just that you can do is relatively little. So here's some short list of what organization or individuals can do to mitigate the man in the browser attack. So organization user control awareness. To minimize the opportunities for man in the browser attack, organization should implement strict user account which has permission to prevent the privilege escalation. This will limit the damage if man in the browser attack is successful. And another is the organization should provide a basic online security training to their staff, covering topics like social engineering and how to detect a compromised computer, among other things. And about the individuals, like check common Trojan storage location. Many man in the browser attack Trojans reside in the same location on your computer. So check the following directories for any of the unknown applications. If you find anything unfamiliar, look it up on the internet, scan it up with the antivirus for your better safety. And the locations are as well common, like C program files or C program files or C Windows temporary file. And the final one is it's better to not leave your browser open. Now you should close your browser when you are using it, done using it, because the man in the browser attack is contained in your web browser. Closing the browser interrupts the attack, so it may be crude, but it works even if the usefulness is limited. So at that point, with all of this, that the malicious wire on that victim machine is pulling data from the DOM and inevitably sending it back to the point when the attacker has access to a command and the control of server. So finalizing the topic is that, for example, the attack is quite different to all the one we have looked already, and it's not exploiting a risk to the web application itself, and it's not exploiting any sorts of risks at the network level either. It actually has a compromised the host. So that's a man in the browser attack, and session hijacking is one of the nasty things that can do as a result of that. Let's now go and round up this and taking a quick look at what really good example of session hijacking in the wild. So in fact, with the case of Fireship, so we talked about it, how the Fireship exploited. So in fact, the HTTP session hijacking, and with that, which is very clear about when an attacker gets hold of a user cookie, they can do anything in the user can do on a particular website. So this is a very classical example of an unprotected session ID cookie and leaking the session ID cookie. And secure the cookie is an absolutely trivial way for an attacker to the mount a session to hijacking the attack. So let's say deep dive of this. So let's go and take a look of the slide and explain exactly what just went on the session sniping. So here we are a very simple explanation. We have a victim who makes a request to the server passing their session ID. In this case, it doesn't actually matter whether the session ID is persisted by the URL or a virus cookie. The point is that this is a HTTP request. It is not encrypted on the transported layer. So now we have
got the attacker sitting down here, and the attacker snips the session ID from the victim. So how do they snip it? It could be a wireless network. So for example, a network in a public place that someone has stood up in order to entice people to connect and snip up their data. And it could be the victim DNS that has been hijacked, and they are actually sending the request to someone else's server to be attacked as a server. It could even be that the ISP in the intercepting the traffic, which certainly seen many examples that happened in the past, particularly when there is a government intervention to play as well. So the attacker snips when the session ID and then simply makes a request to themselves with the same ID. That's the simple session sniffing and particularly hijacking. Once that ID has been snipped, this is a very simple. Now later on we'll talk about the different way to protect from this sort of attack, and the main thing to understand now is that when the request goes over an unencrypted connection, assume that every piece of data can be observed by the attacker. So now let's give you a demonstration. So attacker loads up a device like this. This is a simple device, and attacker actually set a session ID. In fact, session ID is something like, as an example, end with 764 or something. So effectively the victim now has a session as well, and the victim then where a login to the session, it will attack the unauthorized instead in this session, and then the attacker simply reload the page and send the session ID of the server, and the server came back and said that the session ID of the victim ID identified. And it's a very simple way to attack, and it made all the easier by the fact that the use persistent, like you can use fiddler to get the information of your cookies if this website is not verifiable. So this is a very rudimentary attack. So there are many applications that are risk of session fixation. Now there is a very easy test to see if an application has this risk, or you do a begin of a session. So what the session ID is, and then login, and if the session ID doesn't change and the authenticated state is actually persisted by the session ID, there is almost certainly a risk. So keep an eye on what happens to the session ID when a login occurs. That's the main key. So that's a session fixation, and let's now move on and take a look at the actual brute forcing and the session ID. Let's finish this by talking about session donation, and this isn't really a hijacking, but it's a very closely related, and it's a worthwhile being aware of that. It involves a bit of social engineering too, so which does makes things a little bit more interesting. So here's what we're going to do. So we're gonna use a virtual machine. So you are as you can see, I am not logged into any of the account or not even registered. So I'm going to register an account, the name of the victim. As an example, I will register as, I will put the example email address and I'll put the first name. So I'm going to register an account with the name of the victim and I'll create an email address and I will enter the name, and clearly my victim here is John Smith, so his first name, his last name, and with the password of my choosing as an attacker I'll register. So as you can see, I register with a attacker name, and if John follows this URL and loads it up, and of course John is now will be authenticated as John. And how this actually works? Well, what we have done is that the attacker is given our victim a link and that includes a session ID and that has targeted name already logged in it. So when John Smith loads this page, as far as he is concerned, he is logged in because he sees his name. Now this is really the first part of the attack, and it is a bit of social engineering. So we are trying to convince John that this is him, but of course on the face value this would be correct. So this does look like him. This trick is now that we can attacker elicit more information from John. For an example, maybe the attacker would give John a link that goes to the profile page and say, hey John, your profile is out of data, you might like to fill out some your information to complete the account. So the John to fill out some of the further profile details before he can actually perform an action. So for an example, like actually voting on these supercards, it's all about how we can get the attacker to provide information of John's, and with John thinking that this is secure and private, but actually providing the attacker profile simply by tricking the victim into thinking that they are already logged in. So let's go and check out a diagram of this. So what is, just to make this simply clear, so here we go. Let's start with an attacker, and the attacker registers and log into the spoof account. Now again, the spoof account is an account that looks like one should be owned by the victim, and then the attacker gets back to the session ID. For example, they get an URL with the session ID in it, and now it could always be cookie based session persistence, and then the attacker would need to export and execute the access risk to target the site. So in order to give the correct session idea to the victim, the process would actually work either way, but again caveat is that the cookies is needing to be the complete and other risk as well. So attacker gets back to the session ID and then provide it to the victim. So the example we did with session persistent in the URL, we had a URL with the session ID that ended with 765, Now the victim is seeing this page and saying, hey, this looks like I'm logged in, but it's not authenticated to the site based on the fact that the victim is happy to share information with the site because they think they are doing so privately, but it isn't. And one of the beauties of this attack is that so many other controls we put in a place. For example, if we had HTTPS everywhere, the secure transported layer, this still works. You won't get any browser warning, like you might just say cross-site scripting attack, and let's just face it, people used to go on a website and still been logged in for hours and hours. So we have a lot of application out there with a long running session, because it means you can come back to the website and still logged in for the usability. So from a victim's perspective, there is nothing unusual about following a link to a website and saying that they still logged in. Now that's a session donation. Now we didn't really hijack the session in the sense that we took a session ID and the victim already had, but the end result was pretty much the same. We had the attacker in the victim both using the same session ID, and the attacker were able to obtain sensitive information that the victim entered and was logged on that attacker spoof account. So here we are on some sort of exception type. Like main thing is though we can now see the URL that the session ID is persisted in the path. Now I am in here with my attacker hat on. Now I am looking at the exception that someone else raised. Now I am here as the attacker who has been giving a session ID ending in 758. So as in this picture you can see this, I can multiple points in here in the exception which refer to the session ID ending as 757. So that ID has been disclosed in this exception even though it was in the URL. So there is nothing useful in this cookies this time, because we are not doing session persistence for the cookies, but we can see here that the URL request it is exposed, and we can see in this slide that in the down here is one of those server variables, the http underscore asp filter session ID, and this is also exposed. Now depending on the framework it will get exposed in different places, but certainly the paradigm of an exception handling framework is like Ilmar logging the path and that the exception was raised on is very similar, but it is not just exceptional. It is a log that track the path including the session ID. It happens in all sorts of other logs that are occurred just at the normal uses of this site. Even when nothing has gone wrong, let's go and take a look at the web server log that we got, and the one thing the website is generating over here, as you can see in this notepad, that it is a very typical web server log format. And if we jump here at the marking place, you can see the whole bunch of requests which include the interpath, and the path or request to, and of course we are persisting the session ID in the URL, and that session ID appears in the log files. Now this is a real problem because session IDs are sensitive data. We established that by now, and it's enough to allow the attacker to take over the victim's session. So storing them in a plain text in a log file that put some massive risk. As an example, if this like a log file is exposed anywhere, then the attacker can go through the all and recreate any of these sessions that are still active, and they can also get the sensitive data like this is also, and this is not what you want to be logging. So there are a couple of different and really basic attack vectors against the session IDs and persistent in the URL. So let's go and look at the another one. There is a little bit creative, but that's when the session ID is passed in the referral to an external request. So we have just seen how easily a session ID persisted in the URL can be leaked externally. So we saw those log files, and we also saw the IIS log file, and there is another risk with the data that is persisted in the URL, and that's when an unbound request to another website sends the URL in the referring header. Let me show you what you mean by that. As you can see in this picture, I currently have a session ID. You can see in the top upper part, and the ending is 759. Now if we go to any other website from here, like this similar website like troyhunt.com, as an example, you can go to any other website. Now this is a software called Fiddler. Fiddler is a HTTP proxy tool, and it's a great for debugging of web application, because you can see all the requests that web app is making and totally independently on the browser. So as I previously said, if you go to any website from that session, then what's going on the web is that the Fiddler is going to track the raw requests which are actually being sent to the target website. Now if you are not already familiar with the Fiddler, it's a very popular and a free tool, so go and check it out. You can find it in the online. So what it can do is that it goes to this website, so you can see a request appear in the fiddle and a bunch of other requests as well, which aimed with image, style sheet, or any other sort of things that were in the website, and it will all go on, and most web pages there is a heap of other content loaded. So this is everything that the browser sent to this other website, to that website, and what you will see down here in this picture, that under the miscellaneous heading as is a referrer. So the referrer is the site that the user has come from, and of course as we can see here that the site is one that we are going to just go on and refer, including the interpath. So that half include the session ID by clicking on an external link while using the URL for session persistence, and my session ID is just disclosed to this other website, so it doesn't matter that it's a link to this website like Troy Hunt or any other website. It could be anything else. Following link to this fashion will send to the entire URL, and this is exactly what sorts of things that would make the session hijacking a breeze, because the session ID is right here. We have just given it to the other website. Now this is just a nature of how the referrer request and how it works. This is what makes things look like referring Google Analytics work. You can go into any analytic portal and see where people have come from in order to get to your site. This is the whole point of this refer header, but the problem of this course or problem of this topic is that if the previous URL contained the sensitive data, then that data has now been disclosed to another independent site, which I don't have to show you what you can do with this session ID, because you can do anything if you got that session ID. So we have been here in several times. Now the point is it has now leaked, and this is how and easily lead to a session hijacking by a referrer header. So let's take a look at hijacking cookies with cross-site scripting, and arguably this is one of the most prominent session hijacking attacks that you will see in a moment. It is exceptionally easy. So here is what we're going to do. So we'll use a local website, and we're going to see a reflected cross-site scripting attack. So let me show you an execution of the attack, and I will talk through how it actually works in this slide. So what normally happens with the reflected access attack is a malicious link is socialized by the attacker. Now just so that I have taken a screenshot of a tweet, and this tweet does look kind of intriguing. So this guy thought he's saying, oh nice, check this out, it must be something interesting. Now the link looks okay, it's a site that I know and trust, local to Hack Yourself First or troyhunt.com. Yes, that is something off at the end, because after the end, at the end you can see only the 3 dot, not the full website. So we really cannot see the actual URL. So let's go to this website and see what happens. And here we go. It looks just a search page, and in fact this search page is saying nothing interesting to see here at all. However, the attacker has stolen my session ID. So how did this happen? Well, there is a little bit of an indicator on the screen here, as you can see on the left side. I marked it so that I can illustrate the mechanism. So you will see toward the left hand side there is a broken image. So if you click to the broken image, and or you can just inspect the element, then you will see this. So what we will see now is the image source of a attacker.com, and then a query string of cookies equal, and then a session ID equal, and here is my session ID 1004756, and that is the session ID that we just saw in the other tab or other page. Then let me show you how the attacker can use the session. So data hijack the session and the comeback, and we will look the mechanism of how the attack actually worked. So let's look at the URL that you previously saw on the Twitter, and here's what happened. So when we look the search item at the address bar, we can see that the value of a search item that actually quite a bit of content in it. Now as you can see on the notepad, if you paste the full URL, you are seeing a very basic reflected cross-site scripting attack, and I'm going to talk about only briefly here. So the JavaScript is declared an image that I am seeing the source of that image to attack passing a query stream with the name that is cookies, and the value in the document is .cookies. So actually what happening here is that when you skip the run at the browser, it's getting the cookie and it's appending that the attacker.com URL, and it's setting that as a source of that image. So you can see here where the image actually gets appended to the document body. So you can see I have a document body, and that's why we saw a broken image in the browser, because there is no image at attacker.com, but this doesn't matter because my cookies have still been sent off there to check in a request. So last little bit of jQuery script here is just simply to make sure that the h2 heading has a little bit of text, which there is nothing interesting to see here at all. If I didn't do that, we would actually see the search item, which looks a little bit suspicious. Now the reason why your work is evident once you be the source code of this page, as you can see in this here. So from the source, at the end you can see that the entire attack payload here actually appears. So that is everything that was in the URL, and really what we are looking at here is a classic reflected cross-site scripting attack, and in fact it is very vulnerability that demonstrate and explain detail. So the important thing here is to like easy session hijacking attack. So let's take a look at this and how it really works. So let's break this attack down in a nice simple way. So we had an attacker, and the attacker shared a malicious URL with an XSS payload. So that's what I did by Twitter. That was the tweet that had a malicious query string in it. Now the user and the victim was already authenticated, and they followed the link with the access payload. Now when the application received the request, it reflects the malicious payload. So it wrote it to the page, and it embedded it in the page. And of course what was embedded was a request to the attacker with the cookies, so that the code loaded up with the user browser, and of course is the user's browser that has the session ID cookie. So that consequently caused the browser, and which makes a request to the attacker with the session ID. And that was all it was. It was a very rudimentary cross-site scripting attack, but that all it took to get the session ID. Now this is a reflected access. It could also have been a persistent access, so that is cross-site scripting, which is actually stored in the database, so that everybody sees it when they come to the site, and it doesn't have to be reflected by malicious URL like we demonstrated previously. So we wouldn't have to use Twitter, email, or any other channel to socialize the link, because the attacker is persistent on the database. So again, there is a style of attack that I go into the details in the attack. So once the attacker can start to run the arbitrary script in the victim's browser, they can have the opportunity to hijack the session cookies. Now there are the defenses against these types of multiple defense, and I'll talk about this in the later. And narrow this is a great demonstration of just how easy session hijacking can be. That's what I just demonstrated in this slide. So let's now take a look at a group for session IDs, and this is actually a very simple attack, and I want to show you just what this means now. Let's imagine there is an attack that has gone to a website and they get a session ID. Like this one, we see the URL in the previous lectures. Just here doesn't matter whether it's said via the URL or via the cookie. It's just a little bit easier to demonstrate with the URL, but you will see the relevance both in a moment. Now what brute forcing means is that we are just going to keep trying different possible session IDs until we stumble across one that is actually attached to a authenticated user. So for example, if we use a session ID that does look rather like it compiles to a pattern, or a pattern that we could step through just by incrementing the values. So for example, we have a session ID and we want to access it. So if we can change the last digit. Well, the first thing is that the responses came back and it actually increment the URL. So instead of that, they're going to, if that doesn't match, then it will won't be valid session and the increment value will be changing. So if we get anything for that increment our session ID. So if we try again and finally it matches, then we can log into that user, and in this case as the attacker has simply been able to guess a valid session ID from a victim with a authenticated victim, and clearly we now have a session ID that is valid. Now this was possible because over in the background there is a session and there is a authenticated same session ID that logged in as me as an example. So the other session that has been our hijack session, simply by brute forcing or really just guessing a very educated guess, because it's just a simple numeration, but it is still guessing for a valid session ID. So this is just a very simple and immortal. So let's go and look at the slide to demonstrate this very clearly. So here's what happened. Very simple case of having a victim to go and an app that are talking backward and forward with a particular session ID, and then an attacker comes along and the attacker is effectively just asking the server, so does the session ID ending with 762 exist, and a response comes back, and what implies that no it doesn't. Then the responses that we saw in the browser, then the server actually gives us the different session ID because the first one wasn't actually valid. So after the attack of any enumerates, it goes to like session ID 763 and asks the server and then 764, and it just keeps going until it gets a valid response. Now of course this is something that can be highly automated. You script this out and you run it on a bulk and attack, so it doesn't sit there in the browser and it just manually incrementing the URL. Now of course because of this is such a broad cross style approach, just simply enumerating and guessing, it also works like sort of things that can be remotely detected. This would be very unusual behavior to continually see and request for a invalid session IDs which comes in from an attacker, but detecting it is not something that applications normally do. So what we can do to prevent the session hijacking? So HTTP indicates that the security of a website. So if you access those website URL starting with the HTTPS instead of HTTP, this means that the data your computer sends to the server will be encrypted. Without the HTTP, data packets sent between your computer and the server, which are essentially a plain text, meaning the malicious hacker can just read them as they are. So logging out your account will terminate this session. This means you will be able to force the attacker to log out and stopping him to like hijacking the session. And go to the HTTP header and find the set cookie and set the HTTP only attribute, and this way the threat actors will not have a possibility to access the cookies from a client side scripts, so that you can also apply the secure and same site directives. An unencrypted Wi-Fi network is an open invitation for a malicious hacker to steal your information easily. Using either a hardware tool or a software, a malicious hacker can easily intercept the traffic and see what is communicated over the open network. So this includes everything from credit card data to password to instant messages or emails that are important to you. As a takeaway, do your best not to use the open Wi-Fi networks. If you have to use the network, switch to your data plan instead, or if you still need public Wi-Fi, make sure you use a VPN that protects and encrypts your data. And finally, another way to make sure the session stealing malware doesn't infect you is to use the traffic filtering solution. These programs scans your traffic and then block any malware that might be coming toward your PC. A traffic filtering solution will also scan your outgoing traffic. So if it notices personal information of your going to use any suspicious website, then it will cut off the communication and keeping it safe and out of the hands of malicious hacker. And there is a big risk at stake that need to be fixed, and we are going to cover the solution of this later on. So for now though, this is the fundamentals of brute forcing a session ID, which is I think is pretty basic stuff. We established how easy it is to hijack a session. Once the attacker knows the session ID, and we use to reflect a cross-site scripting attack in order for the attacker to get hold of it. But there are other risks which lead to the disclosure of the session ID from a cookie. So for an example, cookies will often be captured in exception logs, and there are many different framework out there, many different tools that aid developers by ensuring that when an unhanded exception occurs in an application, which application prefers as much as application is possible to load, so that the developer can go and review the exception figure out what went wrong. Now unfortunately these logs can contain a session ID. In fact, they can contain multiple different attributes of sensitive data, but the one we are going to look at here is that session ID. Now many vulnerable websites here uses a framework called ELMA, and the error logging modules that handles, and you can come across a exposed ELMA, and many websites that uses that ELMA do unfortunately make the details public. So we'll use the LMR exception log, which is unfortunately exposed on this application, and we can see that here is an on exception with that, and the exception was that invalid column name, and it doesn't really matter what types of exception it was, but there are many different circumstances that can lead to an exception in a web app. The important thing is that we can now drill down into the exception, and when you look at it, we got the internal information data, implementation data, as you can see in this picture. And now one of the things that get disclosed in this internal implementation is that the actual HTTP request, and of course when you have a valid cookie for a site, the cookie gets sent to the request. So from the session ID there will be a log file in the text, and so we don't need to send anyone a malicious link or cause request to go to the attacker website with the session ID. The website was already exposing it. So a great big log of everybody's session ID if they had an active session on the website when an unhanded exception was raised, and then they logged by an ALMA, and now this is a serious problem because it means that there are just all of those exposed repositories there of active sessions, and with those active session IDs floating around the web. And in fact it's very easy just to search for this, so very carefully crafted Google searches that allow you to specifically find exposed logs, not just from ELMA but from all sorts of different framework as well. And there are a significant number of them out there. They are literally a quick search, and you can just literally a quick search on the web and you can find many of them, including ELMA. But it's not just cookies that are captured here in the request, and in fact if I can think, there is a path. Also there is a path, and there is nothing really sensitive in this path. It's just for make the /1. Sometimes that went wrong in the path. The point is the path has been captured in this implementation data using ELMA, and leads us to the discussion about could we possibly leak sensitive data using the path, and that could be used in a session hijacking attack very easily using your path location and get to the session hijacking. So let's go and have a look at what happens with an exception like the raise questions when the session ID is persisted by the URL. So we'll talk about this in this next lecture. So guys, in this lecture we'll be talking about how you can manipulate session ID. So we'll be using a tool called Burpsuit, which is a built-in tool on Kali Linux, but you can also tool that are similar that you can use is called like Wasp or Zap proxy, which is pretty much similar, but we'll be using Burpsuit because it is free and it's very easy to understand and use, and also it is pre-installed on Kali Linux, so you don't need to separately download and install it, and also don't need to pay for any software. It is free, and also it is enormously powerful tool, and it's particularly good at proxying. So the traffic from your browser that that can be intercepted using this burp suite, and then it can enable you to manipulate the traffic, such as you can see how the application behaves under certain difficult defined circumstances, and that's exactly what we're going to do now. So let me go and run our burp suite. So set as temporary because we are using as temporary use burp suite default. So let's run. So the thing about this burp suite is we can use it to proxy all of our traffic through it, and as soon as you open it, it's ready to run because its intercept is on. As you can see, intercept is on. So first what you need to do is you need to set up your burp suite tool and also your browser to intercept, otherwise you cannot intercept the website that you want to manipulate your session ID or manipulate their session ID. So first go to the option. So you have to set this proxy at your on the browser that you will be using or you will be manipulating. So let's go to our browser and change our proxy to, let's go to settings, search for proxy. Is proxy. So just go to manual proxy configuration, just set it as 127. This is the default, as you can see in here. So just copy this port is 8080 SOX v5, press OK. So your browser may vary because I am using Firefox, you may be using Chrome Edge, but this proxy configuration page will be same, so make sure you change this to this. Also you can select as localhost in here, but we will be using this. Because this is pretty much the same. So first we need to intercept our session ID. So first let's turn off our intercept and visit our website. So this is the website, and just what you have to do in order to get your session ID in the opponent or the browser account need to be login. So let's just log in. So the default username is admin and the password is password. So let's just admin password. So as you can see, we didn't intercept anything because our intercept is on. So let's turn on our intercept so that we can get our session ID and then manipulate it to our user case. So turn on and press home. As you can see, immediately it get our session ID, which is this, and as you can see this page is loading because we intercept our connection using burp suite. So when we click forward, then this page will move forward because as we are intercepting, this will continuously loading, as you can see. So what you need to do now is you need to copy the session ID and paste it inside a notepad so that you can manipulate and paste it to another browser so that we can immediately manipulate and copy the session ID and use it to another browser or your another machine. So as our intercept is running, so what you have to do now is like open up your another browser. So let's see if we have any another browser. Okay, we don't have another browser in here, so let's create a new let's create a new private new window. So let's totally create a new window so that we can manipulate our session ID that we copied from the user that login their account. So copy the URL of this page, so which is this, copy, send it to your new or other browser, paste. What you need to do now is you need to turn on your so now you have to turn on your intercept so that we can intercept a different page. As you can see, we intercept it. So we just simply need to do is you need to copy and paste it our session ID that we copied from our previous. So what it did is from the user that login, and without giving admin username and password, we will be hacking or manipulating or copying their session ID, and without giving a username and password, we will be instantly log in their ID without even giving a username and password. So simply press forward so that we can forward this page, because this page is loading, and immediately this forward page will go to the home page. So let's see. As you can see, we logged in as username and we didn't even put any password or username before logging into this page. That's how this session ID actually works. It is much more powerful than just changing attributes or replacing the request or response to that matter, but it is one good example that how we can testing for the risk of session ID just a little bit easier. So that's that about manipulating the session ID using Barbsuit tool. So in this lecture, we'll be talking about a very powerful tool called NetSparker. So NetSparker is an industry-leading web application security solution that automatically scans custom web application for cross-site scripting, SQL injection, and other types of vulnerabilities. It features unique proof-based scanning technology that automatically and safely exploit vulnerabilities and generate a proof of exploit to prove that they are not false positive. So I really like NetSparker as a tool because its simplicity and its breadth, and you will see what I mean by that in just a moment when we actually run a scan. Now that's a NetSparker, but the bad thing is NetSparker is quite a commercial product. You do need to pay for privileges of all of these automatic scans for to use, but there is also a free version available as well, but the functionality is somewhat limited. So what we are going to do now is we are just going to do a brief demonstration of this commercial version, that dig in a little bit of the things that it do and some of the things that it can find, and it can be very powerful when looking for the risk of session hijacking. So first let's open up our NetSparker. So this is a very heavy application, NetSparker. So we'll be using our server to test and scan. So we'll be using this server. So type simply just press the website that you want to scan. Simply just click start scan, allocate, not now, allocate. Okay, it's now running. So is running. As you can see, it can take a lot of time based on the website. So that is the NetSparker which is in dynamic analysis. So what that means is going to run a live running website. So a little bit like a Babsuit that we previously used for session hijacking or session ID manipulating. So you are now seeing that NetSparking is going out and crawling the website that we put, and it's finding all the defined resources on the website, all the links, all the form of options, as you can see in here. Also all the issues and errors or vulnerabilities, and you will start to see the issues appear in here, issues of all different types of security nature. So this bucket does in here. So even a little website like this, it can take hours and hours to scan. So let's keep it running as we go through it. So as you can see, till now in a couple of minutes it found a 159 vulnerabilities in this page, which is like out of date version of Apache, out of date version of a PHP. And also code execution via the web dev, and also password transmitted can be over from using in here. As you can see, web directory has write permission, so this has the vulnerabilities in here. So it also show you the URL where this is the vulnerability. As you can see, it also gives you the details and also impact, remedy and external resources, and also give you a ratings based on the CVSS score. So it can find you a lot of vulnerabilities like cross-site scripting, then like other things like password can be transmitted over query string. As you can see, it's a medium vulnerability, and this is the link where it can be transmitted through, and the form, which is the get method, is redirected. So whether the untrusted data or that reflected the output, which clearly that would be found in those vulnerabilities or in those issues. So as you can see, it keeps running and finding all of those issues. As you can see, so it will run, it will keep running, and it will get a lot of RAM. It will eat a lot of RAM on your machine. So let's see a couple of the issues. So as you can see, cross-site scripting also found in this in here. So let's see, as you can see, cookie not marked, HTTP. So let's have a look in here, and here you can see the identified cookie is show hints. So we are setting a cookie which is session ID but not HTTP only. So this is a confirmed risk, and it's very easy for an automated tools like NetSparker to see that. Yes, indeed, there is a cookie that doesn't have an HTTP but only has a flag on it. So it has classified as low. But of course, you need another risk such as cross-site scripting. Also, like as you can see, yellow is means low. So as you can see, cookie, message, internal IP, cross-site scripting, forgery in login form. So these are the rates. As you can see, code execution, MySQL version is critical, as you can see, and also SQL injection, which is critical confirmed.
So this is the URL that it can be exploit, and out of data Apache, out of data PHP, local file inclusion. As you can see, it keep running and running, and it will give you a lot of critical and low and medium errors that it will find. And also there are like cookies, which is at a low risk because it's an automated tool and it just pointed shoot, and it does make the discovery of this sort of risk which is extremely simple, yet you can find all of those in yourself in here. Now things like cookies did not mark as critical but as low, because I found this in a third tool, although in a couple of minutes it can find it as a critical as it goes through the scanning process. So let's see how to find another. So SQL injection. So this is the URL that it find on the SQL injection vulnerability. So as you can see, it keep running and running. So that's the uses of NetSparker. That's how you can look and exploit the risk and find those in here. So using a tool like NetSparker is a great tool to find the risk in the first place, and then coupling with your knowledge and how to demonstrate what can be go wrong, whether the risk is actually exist or not, is a very powerful combination. So that's all about the NetSparker.
Hello everyone, let's talk about session hijacking. The session hijacking attack consists of the exploitation of the web session control mechanism, which is normally managed for a session token, because HTTP communication uses many different TCP connections. The web server needs a method to recognize every user's connections. The most useful method depends on a token that the web server sends to the client browser after a successful client authentication. A session token is normally composed of a string or variable with, and it could be used in different ways, like in the URL, in the header of the HTTP request as a cookie, in other parts of the header of the HTTP request, or yet in the body of the HTTP request. The session hijacking attack compromises the session token by stealing or predicting a valid session token to gain unauthorized access to the web server. Look at this picture. How attacker gaining access from user to server. Here is the HTTP request victim, attacker and server. Attacker injects script first in server, then attacker hijacks the user's session. Server returns then page code with injected script, and finally victim's browser executes script and sends session cookie to attacker. This is how the HTTP request manipulated. The session token could be compromised in different ways. The most common are predictable session token, session sniping, client-side attacks, XSS, malicious JavaScript codes, Trojans, or many more. Man in the middle attack, man in the browser attack. Like session sniping, an example. In the example, as we can see, first the attacker uses a sniper to capture a valid token session called session ID. Then they use the valid token session to gain unauthorized access to the server. The attacker can compromise the session token by using also malicious code or programs running at the client side. The example shows how the attacker could use an XSS attack to steal the session token if an attacker sends a crafted link to the victim with the malicious JavaScript. When the victim clicks on the link, the JavaScript will run and complete the instructions made by the attacker. The example uses an XSS attack to show cookie value of the current session. Session hijacking, some step like an unsuspecting internet user logs into an account. Let's look practically, guys. First, go to your browser, then search cookie editor. This is actually a Chrome extension. Just click add to Chrome. And simply click add extension and it set it your Chrome browser. Now go to a website, then click the extension cookie editor, and here is some advanced options and general options. Look all the options about the current website. You guys can export anything, import, delete, and add. If you click add, you can create a cookie by giving name and accurate value. Click the checkbox show advanced and you guys can find some advanced options like expiration, domain name, user path value, name, all the information showing this in the specific browser what you guys gonna browse. Cookie editor is designed to have a simple to use interface that let you do most standard cookie operations. It is ideal for developing and testing web pages. You can easily create, edit and delete a cookie for the current page. There is also a handy button to must delete all the cookies for the current page. You can also import, add or export cookies. There is now a search bar at the top of the interface where you can filter out your cookies by name to be able to find the exact cookie you're searching for. Cookie editor fully support Firefox containers, and the add is also available on Firefox for Android for easy and convenient cookie manipulation on a mobile device also. The user may log session hijacking step and fixation attack, like the user may log into a bank account, credit card, site, online store or some other application on site. The application or site installs a temporary session cookie in the user's browser. That cookie contains information about the user that allows the site to keep them authenticated and logged in and to track their activity during the session. The session cookie stays in the browser until the user logs out or is automatically logged out. So how a session work? Like user's bank, user logs in as Bob user. Bank verifies login, assigns session ID of 123456, and user submits fund transfer that includes session ID, and then bank process transfer. Another session hijacking step is cybercriminals have different methods to steal sessions. Many common types of session hijacking involve grabbing the user's session cookie, locating the session ID within the cookie and using that information to take over the session. The session ID is also known as a session key. When the criminal gets the session ID, they can take over the session without being detected. So guys, that's it for today. Hope you guys liked it and thanks for watching.
So we are going through a very important topic where we are going to explain the buffer overflow. So, and this one is one of the advanced and technical topic in penetration testing. And if you give some attention to the section and you do a lot of practicing, you are gonna add to yourself some very good skill when it come to penetration testing. And because most of the vulnerabilities that they found right now, and most of the exploitation and relatable buffer overflow, and you will be able to do that to yourself, and you will be able to create your own exploit. So it's a very important topics, and it will also add to you as some personal skills like how to verify or how to work with memory, and you can understand more the memory structure and where is that and what I said and how it works and whether what the critical area in the memory. So let me start by explaining what is the buffer overflow. Now I'm going to start a specific program, but for buffer overflow it's a weakness inside the application that allows user to get advantage of the memory. So for instance, if we are using a program like calculator and you write down some number like 88 and put a plus, then so you write down a number and you put up a plus sign, and where is the number will be saved? Will it save on the application? No, it will not. It will be saved inside your memory in a place called variable, and it will be a pretty defined location. So the programmers who created the calculator did identify some location in memory with a specific size and allow user to save information. So if you click on a plus sign and you put like 66, this will be saved into another location, and that you click on the equal, or you can see the number, and it will take the amount to the first variable and add it to the amount of the second variable, and that gives you the value. So my point is whatever you are writing on the calculator, this will be saved inside the memory, not your hard drive. Now those places which we refer to as variable, those has a predefined with while creating the calculator application, and those actually have a specific size. So whatever creates a who creates a calculator application did identify a size for for instance, like it is a size of this variable should not exceed the 100 character. So what will happen if you write down more than 100 character like this? You cannot put 100 characters, there is a limitation to it. So in this case, the amount of number would be sent to the variable to be saved that inside of the memory. So if the program is well written, it will not accept that like the calculator. You will try to put more than like 10 or 20 characters, and it will not accept, as you can see, it will not accept more than this. So I can see there is some limit. So after a while it will not start to accept some of the application and which has not verified, and the input has been validated, so someone can send more information and send the capacity of the variable. So there is sending the instances and 2000 characters inside a variable that only can have up to like 20 characters. So what will happen in this case? As I told you in the program, if a program is well written and the input is validated, and it will refuse to accept it. But if the program is not validated and it is not well written, then it will take the value and put them inside the variable. Now what happens is the variable can only have like 10 or 20 characters, whereas the meaning of the character will be sent. So it will be sent randomly in the different places inside the memory. So this is the buffer overflow, that you send more information to a specific location that has a small capacity, and then you can overflow inside the memory. So as you can say, then what the advantage of doing that? So if you do that, there is some location in memory set. So if you send something to them or information, it will be overflow on those specific location, and it will execute whatever you ask them. So you tell them to execute the spelling and it will execute the payroll. And if you say give me the access of the machine, it will give. So the objective here is to use this buffer overflow, which is a witness inside the application, to get an advantage or to get access to a specific location in a memory that will obey to whatever you are going to ask. So you can ask them to do anything on the computer and it will be done. Buffer overflow are one of the oldest and most commonly exploitable software vulnerabilities. They have existed for as long as there have been computer programs. They are also one of the most common software design and implementation errors. In fact, in some programming languages, it is very easy to make mistakes and write the software and firmware that cause illegal access to program memory, and which is basically what buffer overflow is. Fortunately, potential buffer overflow conditions are usually easy to find and fix if you have the program source code. So what does a buffer overflow looks like? Well, because buffer overflow conditions happens inside the computer, they are not easy to actually see the effects of an overflow. May be noticeable by a changing your computer's behavior, but you cannot see the overflow itself. The drinking glass overflowing with water is not a very accurate analogy. Either the closest thing I can think of in real life is when you are filling out a paper form and that contains tiny little boxes for writing your information in, and that if you have a lots of information to write, such as a very long file name, and then it's really easy to run out of room and write past and end the box into the next box, overflowing information to where it shouldn't be as it were. If you think of the boxes on the form is buffer and what you write in them is data, and then you can visualize what's happening in a program's memory when buffer overflow condition occurs. If you see into the memory used by running computer program, you would see many sequential memory elements that are used to store programming data. We usually use a 1 or 2 dimensional grid to represent how these elements are organized from this memory. The program creates buffers for storing the data is used by the program. So if you could see the actual data stored in a program's memory, then there are many tools that will allow you to do this. You would see a world of nonsensical gibberish punctual, which is punctuated with numbers and characters of which may look familiar to you. Let's take a look at what a buffer overflow looks like from the buffer's perspective. Here we can see a buffer allocated with 8 memory elements for storing 8 bytes of data. The elements are numbered 0 through 7 because while computer starts counting at 0, so most programming languages do as well. The memory elements following the buffer might belong to another buffer and some other program, or maybe there are some unclaimed memory and not in use at that moment. So all we know is those adjacent elements that were not part of our 8 element buffers and or outside of our buffer memory bounds.
If we write the character string password into the buffer, we can see all of the data written into the buffer is stored within the buffer memory space. However, if we were to write a longer string in the same size buffer, the additional data would overwrite several of the memory elements which is adjacent to the buffer. This is exactly what a buffer overflow condition is. Another reason why an analogy of a buffer overflowing with the data is like drinking glass filling and overflowing with water is not entirely accurate. It is because of gravity. A glass must fill with water from the bottom up, but in buffers, we in memory can have the data written to them starting at any element. You can overflow a buffer by writing to only a few of the element and not filling up the buffer at all. So when you see a buffer overflow occurs, not because the buffer is full, but because the written, which is writing of the day to the buffer, has overrun the memory boundaries of the buffer. This is why buffer overrun is a I guess you'd say the more accurate description for this condition. But in terms of buffer overflow, that has stuck in modern cybersecurity as we speak. Common buffer overflow and overruns exceed the memory boundary at the end of the buffer. A related condition exceeds the memory boundaries at the beginning of the buffer. This is known as the buffer underflow or the buffer underrun. It may seem strange to fill a buffer with the data starting from end and proceeding backward to the beginning, or filling the bottom of the buffer or to the top, depending on your view. But in some software design, there are reasons to do this, and we just overflows and overruns. If you aren't careful when you are writing the buffer, then many elements you are willing to write, then you can easily write past the beginning of the buffer, causing an underflow or underrun condition. One last point for me to harp in is that the buffers are always writable, and they overflowed by writing data to them. However, it is also possible to exceed memory batteries while reading from the buffer. This is not an overflow condition because no data is being written to memory location where it shouldn't be attempting to read past, but at the end of the buffer or prior to the beginning of a buffer, it still can describe as overrun or underrun conditions respectively. So be sure to note the detailed description of any exploit level as an overrun or underrun to check if it's writing and reading data in its operation. You might be surprised at the data you can find by just attempting to read places and program memory that are outside of but close to the boundaries of a buffer. So buffer aren't the only things that can overflow. There are another condition called integer overflow that can be also exploited for various purposes. However, but for overflows and integer overflow are not the same thing, and you should understand why. Integer are what we human typically call number values that are stored in fixed size areas of program memory, referred to as a variable because the value can be changed. As integer are limited to a specific range of values based on the integer variables such as -32,768 to
32767, which is signed 16 number, and 0 to 25 to 55 for unsigned 8-bit integer. If we perform an arithmetic operation that exceeds the upper or lower size of the integer and attempt to store the result of the integer variable, which is very small, the value will roll over the values on the other and the end of the integer range. The condition is referred to as an integer overflow, although integer roll over might be more accurate description. For example, adding 1 cause the larger integer value to roll over or overflow to its lowest value, like cuts odometer flipping over the 9 to all zeros going through the opposite direction, subtracting 1 for the lowest value result in the highest integer value. Highest integer value of the programming who wrote the code to anticipate the possible of integer overflow and underflow condition and handle them. According the two major problems that can occur with unhandled integer overflow are unexpected results from data calculation and unintended changes and program logic flow. This condition can cause a program to return bad data and perform actions that are not intended by the program's designer. Many significant operation and security issues have resulted from integer overflow and underflow. One type of overflow can lead to another if an integer overflow condition results in the miscalculation of a buffer size, or a buffer overflow condition unexpectedly then changes and its value of an integer variable. As I previously mentioned, that when a buffer overflow occurs inside a running program, what are more things could happen as a result in the real world. That is, human live in a result of an overflow that can be trivial and inconvenience, purposeful, and have a very dire consequences. The same is pretty much true for overflow in the virtual world that computer program run in. Let's take a look of the few consequences of a buffer overflow. Local denial of service. So denial of service is a term that used to describe a condition in which program systems or networks are prevented from providing information transfer and processing services at an acceptable level of performance. Those conditions can be caused by various of ways, but it is always intentional and often malicious. So the occurrence of buffer overflow can cause DOS and DOS mouse condition for this reason. The exploitation of buffer overflow vulnerability is often an attack used in denial of service attack. Rendering a system unable to adequately provide services can be done locally or remotely. So performing a local DOS attack of the system that the attacker has physically access, so that he can be as simple as just unplugging. The computer's power code or network level.
if the attacker can log into the system from the console with administrator privilege, key services can be stopped or the entire system shut down. And when an attacker has a physical access to a system, it usually game over, like a remote denial services, which attacker has access a system over a network from the network, and the attacker can attempt to degrade the performance of a remote system by sending a great amount of network traffic to overwhelm the communication ports, or by making information by processing request. The exhaust system resources or exploiting vulnerabilities that cause services running on the computer to crash. All of the denial of service attacker can use buffer or overflow vulnerability exploit to achieve their goals. A key understanding of denial service attacks as realizing that they are caused properly in maliciously. However, there are also non-malicious reasons to cause a denial service. So, if you discover that someone was remotely accessing your computer without authorization, your quickest response would be to just unplug the computer from the network. Cause again, denial service to the intruder, the action would not be malicious because you are protecting your own asset, but it's a defensive reaction, not just an attack. But what about the accidental denial of service conditions, such as mistakenly leaving a file or a database to a connect network with communicate device unexpectedly falling, or just a server losing power because somebody accidentally pulled its power cord? Because these situations are accidental or natural rather than intentional. They are typically referred to as failure or outages because the root causes of the problem was not just for purposeful attack of denial of service. Buffers are used to hold data that is inputted, processed, and outputted by the program's code, but for overflow vulnerabilities or capable of changing data in program in a way that program designer did not intend. If the changes result in a corrupt data, this may alter how the program operates. If the corrupt data is invalid, and because of the change in data outside the program will occur when carefully controlled fault information may be propagated by a overflow condition into other system and databases. Programs also use the data to make logical decisions. Each time you use a computer programs, you are inputting information to tell the program what to do for you, and this is the data input for the purpose of controlling the program logical operation. If you could input data that cause the program to operate in the program that designer did not want, you would have discovered a bug. Sometimes a buffer overflow bug can be used to specifically influence how a program behaves. The new behavior may be benefit to attacker looking for a way to defeat the security of the system. The next time you log in to an application or web page, imagine what would happen if someone inputting your correct password you copied and pasted from thousand different random character into a password field and hit the enter key. What would you expect to happen? You would see a message like incorrect or username password fault. which would be a proper response. You might see some cryptic error messages, which could be an indication that you input password or username was not handled properly and a security vulnerability made clear. But it would you be surprised if you have successfully authenticated and granted access? Overflowing the buffer of an input field with unexpected data can cause a failure of the program. We select the correct course of action. Like if you put the right user and password, then it's easier for you to see that it log in the successfully and program logic to select the correct course of action. The term commands and control, abbreviated CNC and C2, is a military term that basically means to exercise a command authority to direct forces in accomplishing the goals of a mission. The cybersecurity world has adopted the phrase to describe the taking of the command of one or more computer system by an attacker and using the system for malicious purposes. Command and control is a phrase commonly used in a world of malware and botnet because of the need of attacker to provide direction and receive information from the malware, and command of exploit to install and run command and control malware. And finally, the command and control malware using buffer overflow exploit is a popular way to do that. So how do buffer from overflowing? How do we keep buffer from overflowing? By just safeguard and countermeasures. Safeguards encounters measures to add to our overall risk, mitigating strategy. The logs will not be necessarily prevent every intrusion attempt, but they are part of the proactive mitigation strategy. And for the countermeasures, are control that come into play after a threat has occurred. If somebody picks the lock on your door and enter your premises, an alarm system can react to the threat by silently informing the local polices that are turning on the lights and siren in your home to scare the intruder away. The alarm system will not have prevented the intrusion, but it chooses to have mitigated the amount of damages that could have resulted from a active intrusion threat. Our safeguards encounter measures against buffer overflow and technical administrative, not physical, and are performed by programmers, system administration and information security professional. Let's have a look. What we can do to prevent buffer overflow condition from occurring. Like the best way to do is to not creating a problem code to buffer. So the programmer do is to write safer codes that used to, like, for the benefits of programmer to fix the code and to have the code tested for the system administrator and user to find valuable programs for patch vulnerable programs and remove vulnerable programs for system administrators who don't disable and forget programs, and for users to learn about the software security issues. And it uses, and for that reason it do not use unknown or untested software and do not trust unverified software distributors.
The stack is the area of a process memory where most buffer overflow occurs. A stack memory overflow can cause a process to crash, information aside of the program to be leaked, and even force the process to start other process. To understand how all this is accomplished, we first need to know a few things about the structure and the behavior of the stack. Process of stack is just a type of a memory buffer which is used to temporarily store data that is being used by the process right now or something later. The stack does this and use the data structure known as queue. So if you have ever stood in a line waiting your turn to do something, you know what it's like a queue data inside of a running process. Sometimes has to do the same thing, that is stand in line with other data waiting to their turn to be used. The term push and pop gives you the impression that data is usually being moved onto and off to the stack as if the stack is a covered belt of an assembly line and widgets are being put onto and taken off on the build. However, pushing and popping is actually just writing and reading data values at a different memory location. And inside the state, push and pop data is only copied to another location, and no data is actually being moved to its original location. The stack is just an array of the adjacent storage location and memory. And the each location is accessed using its own unique memory address like the behavior, and the stack is entirely controlled by a few simple rules of a program used to read and write data to the stack memory location. So we keep track where to read and write the next data item using a variable called the stack pointer shown here, abbreviated as the SP, the stack pointer, and always hold the memory address of the next element in the stack. That pop operation will data from a copy to push data item to the stack and the program. So first needs to change the stack pointer to hold the memory address of the next address available element on the stack, and then copy the item that being pushed. We now know that the stack is made up of individual elements of a fixed size and a unique location that used to store a data related item, and the data are commonly stored in adjacent locations. So on the stack, a logical grouping of related elements is referred to a stack frame. So a frame is created on the stack and each time a function of the program is called, and a frame is removed from the stack when the function returns. To get a better understanding of how the stack is used during the lifetime of a process, let's just look at a simple C programming. So if you are not a programmer, so there is no need to be panic, and this is just simple code. So here is an example of a C program. It consists of 3 functions, and illustrated that the computer program is fundamentally a sequence of a function calls and the pointer of execution. The main function is called when the operating system starts the program. This is where the execution of the program code begins. The first program statement in main calls is function 1, transferring the point of execution in the code to function 1, and the first program statement and the function 1 then calls the function 2, transferring the point of execution to the code in the function 2, and the only program statement in function to exit the function to and move the point of the execution back to function 1 to the statement of the following to the call to the function. The return statement exits the function 1 and moves the pointer to execution. Back to the main function, the point of execution continues until main itself returns and the program terminates. So what is happening on the stack during all those function call and returns? So I previously said that each time a function in a program is called, a new stack frame is created for that function. A stack frame is like a logical grouping of data pushed onto the stack, which is information used by the program when executing the function stack frames, and also temporarily store the function data when another function is called. So because of that, the function, after calling the function, it used so that the data can be restored, and when the function call returns, this prevents the data from one function from overwriting, and from overwriting the another data from another function. This behavior is extremely important for the proper execution of every program. So let's have a look at how programs are created in what inside of them. Here is a very simple two function program. The main function is called when the program starts and created the main stack frame by pushing the memory of the address of where the main function will return to the memory address of the beginning of the previous stack and the previous stack frame, and creating the storage space for the integer variable x. This is a stack frame to the main function. When the main function calls the function 1, a new stack frame for function 1 is to store the two function parameter variables and the address of the main, where the call of the function 1 will return to the main address of the beginning of the previous stack frame and memory. For the local variable, k is created at the end, as you see in the picture. This is the entire stack frame for the function 1. The next after the frame is where the next frame would be stored if function was called any function. When function 1 returns the main, its frame will be removed from the stack. The stack is managed using several pointers to keep track of the location of the object in the stack. So we already learned that the stack pointer keeps track of the where the next element of the will be pushed or popped of the stack. The free pointer always pointing to the beginning of the stack frame of the current function call, the call pointer. So this pointer makes it easy to find the information associated with the function, and which function is the code to execute it in some CPU architectures. This pointer is referred to as a base pointer in different names, same purpose. And finally there is an instructor pointer, which point is to just locate and memory and contain the next machine language instruction. This is executed by the CPU itself, and thus instruction pointer steps to the program's code to an incremental fashion, which cause the one instruction to be executed at a time for this reason. So the instruction pointer is also called the instruction pointer or program counter. All of those pointers are actually specialized area of the CPU memory known as like registers, and are all dedicated of the specific purpose and are all vital for the operation of the CPU itself. So we know that the buffer overflow occurs when the data written to a buffer exceeds the memory boundaries of the buffer. So this most commonly occurs when the amount of data written exceeds the buffer's capacity to hold it, and the data is written past the end of the buffer, and if the buffer is allocated in the memory of the program to stack the extra data, overflowing the buffer will override other data that present in the stack. But what does this looks like from the inside the program? So first thing, let's look to function program that shows what it looks like on the program stack. So I hope this picture is becoming familiar to you, because this code and the stack relation is necessary to visualize for understanding a stack buffer overflow. So when we see here, the main function is calling the function 1 and passing to it the name of the program is stored to the argument vector 0 function and the parameter in function 1. So this value is given the function parameter name program function 1, and then it function 1 declares a character array to 16 characters or bytes or length. This local variable is automatically created on the program stack as we can see here in function 1 using the string copy. And copy function, so to copy the name of the program of the buffer and return to the main. So do you see the buffer overflow condition that can result if the name of the program is longer than 15 character? So let's visualize it. Let's say the name of the program is my program, and when we run my program, the name of the program is passed to a function 1 which uses a string copy function to copy the name of the buffer, and onto the stack we see that there is a 9 character and the name of the program were copied into the buffer, followed by a null character represented by the \0 0 as the symbol of a C language, and a string character is always terminated with a ASCII or ASCII null character to mark where the string ends. That's the way they did things in the old days of programming. So when you see the C programming was invented, so only 10 of the 16 characters in the buffer were used to store the program name, but on the DOS system the program and the name can include the file extension. So let's try it. We see that the adding the .exe adding the .exe extension, it takes up another 4 characters with 2 characters left over. Now let's say the name of the program file is changed to a something bit longer and bit sillier, like the 16 character buffers then taken by a program name and other the null character. So we're good, but remember about the DOS file extension. Let's try it. So now there is a problem, as you can see right side in the picture. The program name now has overflowed the stack buffer and overwritten function 1 to a function frame pointer, which is not good. Suppose we change the program name to a something even longer, and now the program name has overflowed the buffer. So overflowed that much that for the function it overflowed. So once entire stack frame has been overwritten and the frame pointer of the frame function as well. Now that we know what a buffer overflow in the stack is and what it does, what it looks like, and what can you do with it, people asked themselves this question many years ago and came up with some interesting answers, like which includes the Morris Ohm, Code Red Ohm, and many other malware. But for overflows, able to call the system libraries, resident and memory run program that are installed on the local storage system, and even inject and run their own code to the system. And of course, while on the overflow can cause a program to become temporary or permanently unstable and even crash, and most likely program will crash. So the challenge of the buffer overflow exploit to a user of the program as a host to launch a successful exploit before a program crash occur. While fixed virtual memory location makes designing exploit code sound easy, but the location of the exploit code itself and the memory must be predictable to execute the exploit code. The instruction pointer must contain the memory address of the first instruction in the code, and sometimes it is possible to experiment with a vulnerable program in determine exactly where the beginning of the exploit payload might end up in the process memory. So however, the state of the process is execution, which will likely make the contents of the stack not very predictable at that time, but the exploit code is injected, so the code could end up at a wide range of possible locations within the stack to compensate the situation, and the two techniques can be employed to either search for the beginning of the exploit code or restart executing somewhere else. So before it and slide down to it, both those techniques are produce a good results and unpredictable and unguarded execution environment. Inside of every running program is a counterpart to the stack called the heap, like stack memory. Heap memory is also used to store data that is used by a running program, unlike the stack, which is a fixed size area of a memory. The heap can grow and shrink in sizes needed by the process using it. Because of this, the heap is often called a dynamic memory because of its ability to allocate and release blocks of memory on demand. As process could requires the name heap implies this area of memory contains a collection of things piled on top of each other, such as heap of laundry on your bedroom floor. In fact, that's all a memory. So heap is an area of memory used to temporarily store data while a program is running. If you need to store data is more persistent medium, then you will need to write it as a file on a disk, because once a process terminates, its heap memory disappears and everything in it as well. The heap can also used to store as a executive code as well, although this is a very uncommon use of the heap unless you are a programmer who writes buffer overflow includes. The exact structure of algorithm used to manage the bit it differs between operating system, but the basic concept is that a large area of system memory is allocated for user by a process. When a process is started, the memory area is filled with memory management structure that we call chunks. and each chunk is filled with a header. When the process allocates an area of memory from the heap, which we will call a block, what are more chunks are reserved to create or allocate the requested block of heap memory. The memory address, the beginning of a block, is returned to the program, so it may read and write data to the block and release the blocks of allocated memory back to the heap where no longer needed. So chunks are freed up to the reallocated to other memory blocks which is needed. So you see that the instructional structure of the heap is very different from the stack. We are ordering position of data item are critical in the stack, so the heap may store data objects at any location without regarding to which chunks are used to store the data of the position for those who chunks amongst other. So objects already stored in the heap, all that is needed for the heap is to have enough free space to store the data object, and the object will then be accessible by memory address in the heap. The memory of the management of the heap memory is therefore the responsibility of the programmer on-set process, so no longer needs a buffer. The memory used by the buffer should be released to the pool of memory from which it came. One of the pitfalls of the programmer control memory management is the possibility that a memory pointer variable to the heap will be used after the memory has been released. One of the pitfalls of a programmer control memory management is the possibility that a memory pointer variable to the heap will be used after the memory has been released. So the pointer variable will still contain the memory address of the released blocks of that heap memory, but it is no longer valid to use, and if code were attempt to do so, then there will be exploited vulnerability and might result it also possible that could exploit code, and also could use the address stored in the pointer to find the hit. To mitigate this, code should always be written to 0, output pointer and handle variables after the memory. The reference is free. So exploiting the heap overflow can be achieved by the heap so that it can be overflow just as stack buffer can, and it changes memory address stored in pointer variable, like redirect the flows of program execution, and also cause the process exception handler to be called, and also crash the running process. And the second one is the code stored in heap can be executed, like redirect the instruction pointer to the code, and also find a heap buffer large enough to exploit the code. So in this code there is a many problem, because that could be a potential exploitable vulnerabilities, but the one is to look into this string copy function is the copies of a string of the heap buffer without the first checking how long the string is, or even if it exists on the command line. This means that the string copy function will write whatever input is given to the buffer regardless of the size of the input of the buffer, and which possibly overwriting the other data on the heap. And so if we can control the input characters, the string copy function will then restore, and whatever the code or data we want on the heap, maybe doing so will or won't. cause the process to crash, and that's for the experimentation. Determine if this vulnerability is exploitable or not. Unfortunately, this example of poorly designed variable code is all too common in modern software, and therefore so our buffer overflows in this code. So a variable that function pointers, variable that stores in a location of a function, and the function are usually called by the name in a code that process, but then which function is to call in the situation that matters. To call a function, it needs to be addressed but not just by its name, and it will be decided which function to call while program is running, and the function called by name must be hard-coded when the software is written. So in this code, I think this code looks weird, but bear with me. This is the declaration for a function, pointer variable name callback function, integer parameter 1. So this variable can store a pointer to a function that has one function parameter, and which is an integer variable, and it returns an integer variable in this statement, and because of that it initializes the function properly. Structured exception handling is a feature that found in Microsoft Windows operating system for handling exceptional conditions that may occur during the execution of a running process. The exceptional condition may be caused by error related to hardware, such as illegally accessing protected memory location, or software related, such as attempting to write a file that is only read-only using SEH. A process can be notified of the occurrences of such as error that allowing the process to recover from the specific exceptional condition and return to normal operation. So if you look through some visual C++ code and notice the keyword like try and except, leave, finally, and the API call raise exception, as you are seeing the code that is using structured exception handling, and realize it SEH was not designed specifically for Microsoft C++, and it can be used by any programming language supporting in the Windows environment. The control structure used by SEH is located in the stack of each thread in a process in Windows, as every stack frame contains a block of structured exception and handling information inside the SEH. Inside the SEH block is a tuple list of memory address called exception and registration record. This is the one record for exception handler, register for use in the function, and for each record contains a memory address that points to the next record. So in this list, linking the record in this way makes it possible for the operating system to run programmatically and move through the record list when searching for the proper index handler, a second memory, and a address point to the code. In an exception handler that is used to handle the specific exceptional condition, if the function does not use structure exceptional handling, then only the exception registration record for the default such as exception handler will be present in the SEH block in the feature stack frame. The presence of Windows structured exception handling allows buffer overflow and exploit authors to solve some of the problems they face first, how do you execute your exploit code after you have injected it into the buffer? Next, do you keep the process from the crashing if your export code accidentally attempts to access an invalid memory location? In some cases, these problems can be overcome by using Windows' own structure exception handling mechanism. Let's look at the history of example at how Windows structure exception handling was used to do. Just this possible of the most famous example of the structure exception handling exploit was used by the code red worm released on the internet in July of 2001. And the code red exploited a buffer overflow vulnerability found in the component of the indexing service used by Microsoft web server. Internet Information Server. This exploit allowed the infected Microsoft server, then it spread other system with the same vulnerability, and this is the actual exploit code used by the code red in the middle, and this is the URL of the code that sends the web server using the HTTP just as an web browser can. In the word written SEH, the record which pointed to the exploit code to the stack, so code red ran its own exploit code using the normal Windows exception handling process. Very clever and very sneaky. Which is very clever and very sneaky. Before we finish with the module, we need to cover a type of overflow condition like this occur inside a process that is somewhere related to buffer overflow conditions. And the integer overflow are arithmetic error that occurs only when adding or multiplying two or more integer results in an integer value that is larger than the storage space and which is allocated to store the value, and such case an unexpected unexpected integer value results. If this incorrect value is not detected and corrected, it can cause a problem in the running program, including buffer overflows. Let's take a look at the couple of simple and impractical examples of integer overflow. In C code, an unsigned character variable can store in 8-bit an integer value in the range of 0 to 255. So if we declare an unsigned character variable and assigned a value of 255 and add a 1 to the value, then assign the result to another unsigned character variable, so what will be the value of the result? The result will be 0, not 256, because the assignment of a value too large for the result variable to store causes an integer overflow. So you can say the variables odometer flip back to 0 and integer overflow work in the opposite direction too. When attempting to store an integer value, this is too small for a variable data type. A signed character variable can store an 8-bit integer value in the range of negative 128 to positive 127. If we declare a signed character variable and assign a value of negative 128 and subtract 1 from the value and assign the result to another signed character variable, then what will be the value of the result? So the result will be 127, not negative 129, because the assignment of a value too small for the result variable to store, so it causes an integer overflow. So as you can see, the overflow the variable, the odometer advance all the way to back to the all 9 just in a wild flip. Integer overflow finally conditions are normal part of the arithmetic operation in computer program. It is a responsibility of the program to write code to recognize when an integer overflow occurs in handle them and appropriately for the situation when an integer overflow condition is not caught and corrected, and for that reason the resulting overflow value is used to control memory allocation or decision of a program logic. Bad things can result such as buffer overflows and other types of memory and access errors that can crash a program or create an exploitable vulnerability. As a user of a or as a user or like a system administrator, all you can do is to keep the minimal necessary software installed on your system and always patch what your software you want to keep.